Hi, my name is Peter Kimpton, 89 Fieldstone Drive.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I got an interesting message after my previous public comment. Particularly interesting because it was a message of support from somebody I don't normally agree with. And I think it's because we both find ourselves feeling the pain of New Hampshire's energy policies, which have made us one of the most expensive places in the United States for power. And while we're hopeful for relief from this Twin States project, I think we're all justifiably concerned it could also have the opposite effect. I'd also like to make something clear. I'm neither opposed nor in favor of the project at this time. I'm genuinely looking forward to more details about this tonight. But I am calling for caution. Because as myself and a fellow resident commented at the last meeting, some pretty powerful business and political forces are often aligned around projects like this. In reply to a public invitation before this council, I did look into other politicians who take campaign donations from utility companies. On the New Hampshire Secretary of State website, I found that the leader of the New Hampshire House Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy, Chairman Michael Vose, took over $1,000 in donations from Eversource and TransCanada last year, triple what they gave him in 2020. And it was 4 times more than they gave the vice chair of that committee, which is our own Representative Thomas. And I honestly didn't find this information very comforting, as apparently was intended. I'm also urging caution because once these sorts of endeavors get underway, there's virtually no stopping them. When the Northern Pass project fell apart, those power lines from Canada to Massachusetts were routed through Maine instead. Work began at the start of 2021, and Maine citizens rushed to get a statewide ballot initiative in place for the election. In November, Maine citizens voted 59% to 41% to cancel the project. But the work had already begun. The ballot result was tossed by the state Supreme Court, and the project continues forward today, even though the majority of Maine is against it. Another concern is that we need to set our expectations appropriately. Central Maine Power originally estimated their project would create 3,500 jobs, but a little over a year later, that number dropped to 1,600. A substation in Pownell, Maine was planned. Projected tax revenue to the town was $1.4 million, but last month that substation was canceled because it wasn't determined completely necessary. These are not anecdotal examples. We saw similar things here in New Hampshire. Northern Pass was estimated to create 1,300 to 1,600 jobs over the course of 3 years. But a subsequent study by an independent New Hampshire research company determined a more realistic figure was 1/3 of that number. The independent study also revealed that New Hampshire doesn't have enough of the specialized labor needed to support the project as it was outlined. So many of those jobs were actually going to go to workers who would be brought in from out of state. And going back to my point earlier about how difficult it is to stop a project once it starts, we need to be aware of SB 54, which that Energy Committee recommended ought to pass last month. And that is a proposed state law which would raise the maximum contract length with a regulated utility from 6 months to up to 20 years. If a utility project yields a negative result for Londonderry residents, it could be something we'll be forced to live with for decades. The consequences could be huge. So as we hear the presentation this night, or tonight, I'd encourage you to keep these recent lessons and comparable projects in mind. The figures need to be treated with caution. The potential conflicts of interests need to be weighed. And there is a huge difference between a projection and a firm commitment. So as this council looks out for the citizen interest this evening, I urge you to remember what I never thought I'd be quoting Ronald Reagan. But I urge you to remember what he used to say: trust but verify. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. New business, Twin State Clean Energy presentation. Who will be presenting? Gentlemen, name and address for the public, and please proceed.
Hello, Council. My name is Teron Hill. I'm a project director for Twin States Clean Energy and live in Boston.
Welcome.
My name's Sean Downey. I'm a representative of National Grid with a firm called Hilltop Public Solutions.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Well, first of all, thank you to the council and to town manager for having us in tonight. I think I'll start by introducing the team that's with us tonight. Teron Hill, to my right, is the project development director for the Twin States Clean Energy Link project. And then with me here, I'll just introduce them for the sake of time. Jessica Farrell, overhead transmission engineering. Corey Schutzman, lead environmental scientist. And Matt Spofford, substation engineering for National Grid.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Teron to kick us off.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. I appreciate your patience.
Well, we're very thankful for the Council's time tonight to talk about the Twin States Clean Energy Link. We're very early in the proposal, but we're here because we really want to get input and to understand how we can really deliver a good project for New Hampshire and the communities. It's been commented earlier this evening that energy bills are high. Part of the reason why energy bills are high is because New England is highly dependent on natural gas. That chart up there shows that we get almost half of our energy from natural gas. And natural gas is something that we don't produce here in New England. And so we get our natural gas at the end of the pipeline. What I don't think many people know is that we actually get a lot of our natural gas, especially during the winter months, from other countries. Natural gas that is shipped here for what we call liquefied natural gas. And because of that, the price of electricity does fluctuate. This past winter, we had some of the highest electric bills here in New England, as well as in New Hampshire, that we've ever had. And that's because that price of natural gas is based on global commodity prices. So what happens in the rest of the world affects us here in New England. Part of the way that we can move forward is to lessen our dependency on natural gas. And that really means that we need to change our energy supply mix and bring in more resources in order to really move forward more energy that is made here in New England. And so the proposal going forward is to build more offshore wind, and New Hampshire is looking at offshore wind, to build renewable resources here in New England, places like the Co-ops Loop, such that we can produce more wind and solar here in New England. But when you think about it,
I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question?
sure.
Offshore wind in our 19 miles of shoreline?
The New Hampshire legislature is looking at offshore wind leases in the
Okay.
Gulf of Maine.
I'm just curious. We don't have much of a shore, that's why I asked. Okay, thank
But
you.
you do have access to those waters.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a great question because offshore wind is going to make up a significant amount of electricity production going forward. When you think about all of New England, including New Hampshire, they're looking at something like 10 gigawatts of offshore wind. And when you think about it, at the end of the day, if the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, I don't know about you guys, but I would think that you want your lights to come on, even if the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. So how do we do that? Well, our proposal is to bring in more hydro resources from Quebec. In order to do that, we need to build transmission. We don't have enough transmission into New England. There's a need to invest in infrastructure. There's a need to replace a lot of the infrastructure that's already existing. National Grid is a utility here in New England. We operate roughly 200 miles of transmission assets through the Granite State, as well as a number of substations. What we're proposing here today is to bring in more transmission, but reutilize the assets that we already own in the state. And in doing so, as we have more renewable power, we can bring in hydro from Canada in order to balance those resources, such that when you do turn a light switch, regardless if the wind is blowing or not, we can balance those resources with an affordable resource. And when you think about, next slide, when you think about the resources that exist up in Quebec, National Grid operates a 2,000 megawatt HVDC line today. That line runs through Vermont and New Hampshire and brings in a lot of clean, affordable power. Because of the significant amount of hydro that's in Quebec, that line, on average, reduces energy prices by roughly 10%. And so what we want to do is put in a new line that would bring in more resources from Quebec in order to help reduce prices and also move forward our renewable energy that's already developing here in the Granite State. Part of the way that we aim to do this is utilizing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a program of the Department of Energy called the Transmission Facilitation Program. Back in February, National Grid applied for this program, for this proposal, and we were invited back to phase 2. Right now, we're putting together our application that's due on July 5th. If we're awarded this RFP, we will be allowed to move forward this project and get IIJA funding in order to move it forward. So Twin States Clean Energy Link is really about bringing in transmission from Quebec and utilizing existing rights of way. This is key to our proposal. We understand, and I've heard very much so from the community, that we should be utilizing the infrastructure that's already there. And so our proposal is really to do just that, to bury the line under state roads through Vermont and Route 135 in New Hampshire, and then to connect in to the existing substation. So if you look at the map here, what we're proposing is that we will cross the international border in Ken, Vermont. We will bury the cable underneath state roads in Vermont, and then cross over into New Hampshire in Dalton, New Hampshire. We will go underneath the Connecticut River using a process that we call horizontal drilling, such that we're not disturbing the Connecticut riverbed. And then Route 135 buried underneath that road through New Hampshire, from Dalton into Moreau, New Hampshire. And the reason why we want to get to Moreau, New Hampshire is because National Grid currently operates at the Comerford substation. And we can use that land where previous converter station existed for that HVDC line that I spoke about earlier, and then use the exact same right-of-way. We would not need to expand that right-of-way. We would stay within the existing right-of-way coming all the way down to Londonderry. This is what the right-of-way looks like today. So there are 3 transmission towers in that right-of-way, 3 lines in that right-of-way. In the middle is that HVDC line that exists today. And then on the side of it are 2 smaller lines that are rated at 230 kV voltage. Those lines will continue to be there, so we're not going to expand that right of way, but we're going to restring new lines on those structures, such that we can bring it up to a higher voltage at 345 kV.
So you're going to take down the existing structures and put in new structures. You're not going to add more structures.
Chair, actually, what we're going to do is keep those structures and put up new wire.
New wire.
New wire.
All right. So are you going to put structures on the ends? All right. You got
Yes.
3 structures. Are you adding structures on the ends?
No.
So you're not going to take down any more trees or anything else, such as Eversource has already
Why
done.
bring up our transmission line engineer?
Because I deal on a daily basis with the recent Eversource expansion and the number of trees being taken down, along people's properties.
No, so to give you an overview, so we have the cross section here, as Teron mentioned. We have the 230 kV lines on the outside of the right of way. As part of this project, we're not looking to expand, but we do need to reconstruct the circuits, the 230 kV circuits, in order to create space for 2 new 345 kV lines.
Yeah, which generally those wind up on bigger towers.
They do. So what we're
So the
looking to
towers are going to change.
we will be replacing the 2 structures on the outside in Londonderry, yes.
Okay. What's
So-
your mitigation plan for all the homeowners you're going to affect?
We are not expanding the right-of-way. We are rolling the circuits to a vertical
Okay, I
configuration.
want to be really clear. You're not expanding the right-of-way, right? You're not taking down more trees in that right-of-way now that abut people's homes. Because I already went through this with Eversource.
I completely understand the concern. So we are not increasing the width of the right-of-way as a result of this project. There may be some sideline trimming, but no wholesale vegetation removal. So it'd be more limbing because we do maintain this right-of-way to approximately its 350-foot width.
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat myself. The current abutters to this right-of-way are not going to see any change in the larger trees, only vegetation. The larger trees are not gonna be harvested and taken out, you're only trimming and doing vegetation.
It will be generally vegetation management, sideline trimming. Yes, I can't speak for every tree, but I will say that there are no large pockets that we are aware of that would require removal.
I mean, recently Eversource expanded their corridor, you're aware of that, right?
Very much so, yes.
Okay. If you went out to this corridor and the number of conversations I've had to have with homeowners and everything who didn't really understand what was happening and the mitigation that had to be done, that they didn't understand that they were eligible for until they had to contact the town council, who found out about it at the same time and had to bring the state reps out, had to call the governor's office and all these other pieces. I'm not gonna have to do that this time.
I will say that we will do our absolute best to clearly communicate the scope of work.
Okay, again, that's what Eversource told me. Okay, you're gonna do your absolute best to communicate what you're gonna do, and then the trees are gone and they don't grow again for another 25 years. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I understand you have a job to do. I probably understand it better than most. But what I wanna know is are those abutters to that corridor going to now be looking at power lines, which, like it or not, reduces the value of their homes from the perception of people who don't understand what the ohms mean, and the ohms are higher inside your house than they are on the power lines.
If I could, I'm sorry. sir.
And I'm sorry to give you a hard time, but I've been going through this for the last 2 years.
First of all, I think Jess should walk you through some of the cross sections.
I'm sure Jess is a nice lady. I heard her name is Farrell.
That's right. Very good compliment. If I could answer your first question, Mr. Chairman, as it relates to outreach and communication, I certainly understand that there's been some concern. I can
Oh,
speak.
concern is the lightest word you could
that's- yeah, I
possibly
was gonna
use.
say.
How about people being aghast? How about people standing in their driveway screaming?
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I've done work for National Grid for coming up on a decade doing exactly this kind of community outreach effort. And we're more than happy to dive in and understand more ways that we can over communicate with folks. I can't possibly stress that enough on behalf
Go
of.
walk along the Eversource corridor. There are people who every tree in their backyard is gone. And they had no idea. But they were going to communicate with everybody and do the best they could too. No disrespect meant. But that's what they told us to.
Right. As Jess mentioned, the right of way is, pretty neatly kept to the 300-foot width, but
I've seen the National Grid right away. It comes right up against the Londonderry Fishing Game. I know where it is.
before I turn it back to Jess, though, sir, to answer your original question, I mean, we'd love to have a conversation about ways we can maximize the outreach and communication. I mean, my team and I will knock on every door on the right of way and make sure folks know exactly what's coming, when, and understand individual sets of concerns, not only as it relates to visual, but also construction impacts, noise. If folks work from home and they have concern about construction noise on any certain given day, I love this stuff. I'd love to sit down with you and understand more about how.
Let
we
me
can
ask the
possibly
council a
communicate.
question. Is the council okay if I ask National Grid to work with one of our staff members and explain to them exactly what they're gonna do? And I'm thinking along the lines of a guy who's just not gray at all, John Chartier.
Yes. Absolutely.
So John Chartier is our town engineer, who I'd like you to work with on this and everything. John is the most rules-oriented, black and white guy I know. And you wanna know what? I'd like you to explain it to him, so, and I've known John for 20 years, so he can explain it to us. You know, and we understand it. I understand what you're trying to do, and I understand what you're trying to do is important. I get it. But I want to know from John what it is. Because John knows what we deal with every day from a planning portion of this company. We good with that?
Yeah? Oh, yeah.
Are you good with that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
You'll be happy to introduce them to Mr. Chartier?
We'd love the opportunity.
No, and I don't want to give you guys a hard time here, because I know you guys, you're just here doing a job, and I understand that. But I'd like Mr. Chartier to understand so he can explain it to us.
But I think they also have to realize the reality that we're faced with what's happened in the past.
Well, you'll go along. I'll walk you along the EverSource corridor if you like, and I'll show you I'll show you what people really preferred wouldn't have happened.
I think that'd be a great idea.
I think that's probably the
I'll bring
nicest
my
way to say
boots.
it. And Mr. Chartier knows where they are too, and he can show you too. But these people, for lack of a better term, got blindsided. And those that were smart enough or astute enough, or whether they were just asking questions, got to somebody and got mitigation and got a little bit better than what they would have gotten. And I really don't want to go through another 2 years of that.
Understood.
So, but thank you. I think you're down. I know we have a power issue. I know we have to do something. I get it.
Agreed.
But we'll continue to listen to you. Sorry for interrupting.
No,
Chair, if you'd like to let them go through this and just have you show on the next page how it will be designed, staying within their 350.
I'd love for Mr. Chartier to explain it to me. Because, he's a very friendly guy. He's a nice man.
Yeah, he is.
He's just
where it
very
goes.
engineering. He's a very town engineering kind of guy. So please, I'm sorry that I interrupted.
no, not at all.
So this is what we have for an existing cross-section north of Wiley Hill Road. As part of the proposed project, what we're looking to do is take the existing 230 KVs and push them to the outside of the right-of-way with the center line 45-foot offside at either edge. By doing that, it allows us to create space within the existing right-of-way to install two new 345 KV lines. By doing this, we don't need to expand the right-of-way, and it allows us to keep the 230 KV lines energized while we build out the new structures.
So essentially what you're saying is you'll go from 3 horizontal formatted structures to 4 vertical structures and maintain that center horizontal.
See, and again,
Yes, and it'll be symmetrical about the center circuit.
and again, what I got after they did this the last time is that we can't be within 75 feet. A tree can't be there because it's going to affect the line. And then they told me it was a federal law. And then I found that it wasn't a federal law. It was actually EverSource policy. So not to keep dwelling on the same point, but I think you're sort of getting it.
Oh, I do understand that, and the way that we have oriented the structures does satisfy our vegetation management criteria, including FERC's FAC 003 guidelines, which I believe were what you were referencing there. So this is the configuration north of Wiley Hill Road, and I will say that this is a conceptual configuration. We're working on optimizing the structure heights to bring them down to at or below the height of the existing circuit in the middle, which averages about 110 feet. So basically, we're looking at increasing wire tensions and installing additional structures to lower the overall height of the structures so that we're reducing visual impacts. So, south of Wiley Hill Road, as you have mentioned, the New England Power Corridor parallels the EverSource corridor. So you have two 345 kV lines set up horizontally configured on the left side of the page, with the 230 kV lines centering on the existing DC line on the right-hand side. As part of the project, similar to the north of Wiley Hill Road section, with the national grid lines, we're looking to, again, move the 230 kV to vertical structures, push them towards the edge of the New England Power right-of-way to create space for the two new 345 kV lines. And we'd leave the 450 kV DC line in the center of the New England Power right-of-way alone.
So what you're looking at here is, on the
Is-
left-hand side is the EverSource right
See
of
over
way.
there.
There.
Questions, other than all the ones
Not
I've
yet.
rudely interrupted with?
But wait, there's more. All right.
So just to be clear, the route that's pictured on the slide that you just had up,
Sorry.
that's the only transmission lines that are proposed for an upgrade or change?
So that is the vast majority of it. We are proposing to connect in with the EverSource system. So there may be some minor line spurs to connect to a proposed new substation that we're working on fine tuning presently.
It's over by the soccer fields where they converge.
Okay. Thank you.
This
Me-
area-
Actually, I do have another question, Mr. Chair. Were you, so the, N 214, 451 DC, that line that is in the picture, as you just previously mentioned, tying in the Eversource and stuff like that, would you be willing to email the council or maybe through the town manager, the proposed changes in those, the, like, kind of like a map with an overlay similar to this with the other?
So we can get you what we have. Again, it is conceptual. We're working on fine tuning the information and the design to make sure we're reducing impacts and being mindful, but we can give you what we have, yes.
Thank you, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I should have mentioned earlier that we're very in the early stages. So, to the concerns that were made very abundantly clear, part of the reason why we're here today is that we want us to have these kind of conversations very early and often. So part of it is just getting feedback in terms of how we should be looking at the project, such that when our engineers, folks like Jess and others, are designing the project, we can design it with public input in mind.
Absolutely. You're gonna love Mr. Trider. He's a very thorough engineer, and your engineers can all speak the same language with him. It's gonna.
We will love that.
And,
We love that kind of
and we'll all learn a lot.
Absolutely.
We have Matt speak to the substations.
Okay, Matt.
All right, Matt Spofford. I'm the substation engineer with National Grid today. I'll be talking about, as part of this project, like Tehran mentioned earlier, we have a new substation being built up in Monroe, New Hampshire. It was labeled as Comerford earlier. That's what we call the equipment up there. Also in Dunbarton, and we would need a new one here as well in Londonderry. We're still looking at sites for the substation. It's a fairly large substation tying in our National Grid lines, Eversource lines, to distribute this power through the area. And we looked at it originally. What we prefer to do as a company is open air substations. We realized in Londonderry that's not realistic. It would require something on the scale of about 9 acres of land. We don't want to impact the city in that way. And so what we are looking at instead is a gas insulated substation. We have a picture of one on the screen here that's in our system now. You can see the transmission lines overhead coming into the larger structures. On that large building, kind of right in the center left of the picture there, is the gas insulated substation. Essentially what it is all of the equipment has gas within it as an insulating medium. It all fits in this one building. And there's a smaller building you can see off to the left side where the van is located that has all of our protection equipment that allow the lines to operate, trip, and come back online if anything happens at the substation. And by going with the gas insulated substation versus the open air, we reduce the footprint from around 9 acres to around 3.5. So we're really trying to do what we can to limit how much space we need for this substation and make it work. That also includes future build out of the substation in addition to what we would need for this project. So we're planning for the future so that we're not clearing additional land down the line, coming in saying, you know, here we have the substation that's going in, and then coming back to you 10 years later saying, we're going to make this site larger. We're planning for the future with it as well.
So are you familiar with the Scobie Pond substation?
Somewhat. That is an Eversource substation though, so
It
limited.
is. I'm just using it as a comparison. Is it the same size as Scobie Pond? Is it bigger? Is it smaller? Because we all know where Scobie Pond is.
I believe I was asked this question before, and I can't say with 100% certainty, but I'm fairly certain Scobie Pond is an open air substation.
It is.
So this would be about 40% of the size of that substation.
That gives us a good comparison. Thank you.
Yep. So this is just another image here. This is one of our existing substations being built in 2005, a gas insulated substation on the inside. This is what it looks like just for reference. They build this large building, they house all of the equipment in it. You have circuit breakers, you have gas insulated bus inside of there. And it's a good design. It's it's well thought out, and it allows you to fit a lot of equipment that would normally take up a really significant footprint in a small amount of space. And we have quite a few vendors out there that offer this, and they're really passionate about it. It's very well designed.
Any questions?
Why would your power company prefer the open substation over this?
In general, they're easier to maintain. It is just easier to build drive access, to get the lines in and out of there, to get the maintenance trucks in and out. Gas insulated substations, they're a bit more unique. You really need to work with the vendors a bit more to maintain them. I don't know that I can say that the maintenance is more expensive, but we don't have a lot of them in the system. They're more expensive to build, and so we generally try to keep the open air so that our folks internally can maintain them and operate them. But we do have experts in-house that do work on these on a daily basis.
And the gases used, are they toxic or volatile to anyone in case of like an accidental release? I mean, I'm naive, so I don't know.
So the gases inside the equipment, as of right now, they're working on technology with different gases. Right now, there's sulfur hexafluoride, which is considered a greenhouse gas. And they've come a long way in terms of, I'm fairly certain none of our substations have had significant leaks at any point recently. I don't have the exact data, but we have to report all of our SF6 leaks to, I believe, the Environmental Protection Agency. And the vendors have come a long way in ensuring that doesn't happen. And we have pretty advanced monitoring systems as well to detect that.
And last question, do you work with like local fire departments and stuff, since there's toxic chemicals and like just on what's in there, do a site walkthrough and everything? I mean, I know that's part of the planning process, but.
I'm not sure if we've done that in the past. I think we would be open to it. I guess,
We would
Teron,
be
if you want to
completely
speak to
open
that.
So in places where we installed a GIS and other, we don't have that many gas insulated substations. As Matt was saying, typically our air insulated substation is what we built for a number of reasons. They tend to be a lot more cheaper. It's less engineering complexity and a whole host of factors. But in places that we do have them, we tend to do trainings with the local fire department. Such that the local fire department knows the plan and knows the risk management and crisis management approaches that we would take. I should note that we've had these in our system for over a decade now, and we have not had any incidents.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, this would have to go through the fire department anyways, part of the planning process.
There's a number of, I mean, this is a conceptual early view.
Yes.
There are more steps for them to take than they probably would like to take, and probably more steps than anybody even understands.
And we should clarify, we are very early in the process right now. So when you think about this project, right now we're having outreach to communities. We're doing it outside of the formal governance process. So when we start permitting, we're going to have to do public comment and public outreach during that period. We're starting way before that. And we're planning to start our permits around the fall, end of year timeframe. There will be tons of public comment with that, but we plan on doing open houses with the communities this summer, such that we're getting more and more input from communities.
No, it's great. And
We would then start, if we get our permits within the next, that takes 2 years to do. So we're not talking about construction until the 2026 timeframe.
Thank you.
all right. Are you guys currently connected to the power plant in town? Does that go down the National Grid corridor?
Is that the
It's a gas-fired power plant up in northern Londonderry?
tie in at North Litchfield?
So does,
So
it
we,
does,
we
it's
do
on,
have a
it's,
substation in North Litchfield that ties into that.
and so that does go down the national, go over to National Grid. Okay.
I believe it
I
does.
thought it did, I just couldn't remember. Okay, anything else?
We're almost done, I promise.
Yeah, no worries. You guys were patient.
So I'll be brief on these couple of slides, and then we can get into some of the specifics about the Londonderry numbers as well. We are in the process, as part of this U.S. Department of Energy, not education, RFP process, we are assembling a community benefits package totaling in the hundreds of millions of dollars for both of the host states, Vermont and New Hampshire. The idea being that these funds go towards community-identified needs and projects, with a wide range of backgrounds. And part of the reason that we want to talk about this tonight is start a conversation with the town about projects and needs and other areas that you have previously identified or think about currently that we might be able to be supportive with. Again, we've got a long time to go with this project slated to go into service in 2030, 2031. But these conversations are important to have now, and we'll follow up with the town manager, et cetera, to make sure we're connecting on this. We're also looking to partner with economic development agencies and other organizations to help meet those community needs and reinvestment opportunities. It's important to note that we've partnered with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and local unions here in New Hampshire. Specifically, Local 104 comes to mind. They, as I understand it, have had an increase in the number of line workers, et cetera, that are available here in state to support a job like this. And as Tehran's mentioned throughout, we will lower energy costs for New Hampshire residents and businesses. I thought you were going to say something. And then, the bidirectionality of the line that Tehran mentioned, we're really excited about because both the upgrades we're making to the system and the bidirectional nature of the line will allow onshore and offshore renewable generators in New England to export power to Canada during times of surplus. And I touched on this, Mr. Chairman, stakeholder collaboration. I can't stress enough how important this is to National Grid. We want to be knocking doors. We want to recognize that nobody understands, nobody consumes, no two people consume information in the same way. So making sure we're finding different ways to reach people in your town is really important to us, and that includes you. Take this one.
Sure. So I spoke about this earlier, that projects like this will help to reduce the cost of energy for New England. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that this project like this help reduce our dependency on natural gas. And so this project is really meant to do just that. As Sean was noting, that we'll be able to not only bring affordable hydro from Quebec into New England through this project, but we will be able to send Quebec renewables when we're overproducing renewables, when the wind's blowing too much or the sun's shining too much. And so that's a huge benefit of this project. And then we partnered with Citizens Energy, a nonprofit that was started back in the 1970s in order to really help home heating assistance. Nowadays, they invest in solar projects and transmission projects. And as part of that commitment, Citizens Energy will be reinvesting over $100 million back into the host communities. And so we spoke about what those look like. We talked about things like revitalization programs, workforce development, but we really love to hear from the communities and understand how to best utilize that money. And then this project will also reduce greenhouse gas emissions for New England by roughly 4 million metric tons per year. Our estimates, and we would love to continue to have a discussion with Londonderry about the contribution to how this project will help to generate tax revenue for the community. Our estimates show that based on the length of the right-of-way, the upgrades that Justin and Matt spoke about, we're talking roughly $750,000 per year in additional revenue to the community.
Anything further?
And just that this is very early on in the process. We do have a commitment to you to really make sure we're doing what's best for the project and what's best for the community. And so we would love to continue this discussion as people talk to their neighbors and talk to their friends. We have our contact information up there. Please do send us your questions and your feedback.
Okay, anything further from the council? I have some closing comments, but anything further from the council? So, one of the advantages or disadvantages about being around a long time is that you've seen a lot. We had a power plant come to town that, divided the community and, and they, like all people who come to town, they come in and they tell us they're gonna do X and You know, long story short is it was built, and it pays us in excess of $5 million a year. We have a gas line that comes through the middle of town that goes to that power plant, because it's a gas-fired turbines and everything else. There was a lot of controversy around that, and there was a lot of promises made and a lot of things set up front, and, you know, we wound up having to do a lot of work to make sure everybody was upholding all of that. You heard about the recent Eversource piece and everything. You're gonna be met with this skeptical community, because we've been through a lot over the last 20 years. And you're gonna be met with a skeptical, you know, town council, because we've seen a lot over the last 20 years. So, we're gonna be watching closely, we're gonna be listening closely, and we want, in all seriousness, we want you to go explain it to Mr. Trottier, so he can come back and explain it to the people of Londonderry. So he can be at those workshops and answer those questions of how it affects this community. I do know that you're all here trying to put your best foot forward, and you're trying to do all the right things, and you only have the answers that you have today, and I understand that. But do understand that we are going to be, I don't want to use the word suspicious, so I'll stay with skeptical, and that we're going to be asking a lot of questions. So while I understand the need, you know, our job is to protect the 42 square miles of Londonderry. Because, as you heard when you were here earlier, we love this place, and that's our job. So is there anything else from the council? All right, we'll definitely be looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you for your patience in being here this evening.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time, and we hope to earn that Londonderry's trust.
Thank you.
I hope you do too.
Thank you so much.